20 years ago, Yom Kippur Yizkor 2000 was a surreal experience for me. Many of you I know recall that during the previous Jewish year, I had lost not one, but both of my parents. You all think of Kaddish, the Kaddish we recite as mourner's Kaddish, because that's the way the prayer books title it in English. But the literal translation is not mourner's Kaddish, but orphan's Kaddish. And so from one Yom Kippur to the next, I went from having two active, alert parents to being an orphan. As I led the congregation in Kaddish that year, I'm sure you can understand why it felt surreal. But I learned something this year. There are degrees of surreal. My parents' deaths so close together were not even in the same league as the surreal experience of Linda's funeral back in April. Because of the virus, there were two rabbis, a cantor, a funeral director, and 4 people at Linda's funeral. Neither of her 2 sons was able to be there. My daughter was able to drive in from Austin. She and her husband were 2 of the 4 people. But we did not hug each other. We kept our distance from each other. And when the funeral was over and we left the cemetery, I turned right to go home, and she turned left to go back to Austin. And I know this is just a variation on the surreal experience of most of the families who lost loved ones this year, whose names you will hear Rabbi Hayon read later. Now, we all know in our head how communal mourning is, but to experience grief without community turns that knowledge into an experience in a way that literally shocks your system. And as weird as it was to stand at the graveside with so few people, that feeling was reinforced again when I walked back into my empty apartment. It was shocking not to see several people putting out food, looking for where Linda kept the serving pieces, asking me if I knew where the bowls were, or the platters were, or the paper plates were. Instead, I walked into absolute silence. The hustle, the bustle of loving, surrounding friends wasn't there. There was no buffer between the cemetery and the emptiness that I knew I would feel, but not until everyone had left. And as you know, as I said, I'm not alone. Everyone who has lost a loved one during the pandemic has had some version of my experience. The absence of people, the inability to receive the loving hugs that help us mourn, the shared tears, the reinforcement that comes from sharing the death with others who also loved him or her. The only word I can think of is the word I keep repeating, surreal. It runs counter to everything we know and expect when facing the death of a loved one. I can tell you that however hard it is to mourn with community, it is so much harder without community. It is important to add, though, that every phone call, every letter, every donation that followed was a gift, a treasure. Everyone was a gem that felt like a comforting hug, a warm embrace, a shared tear. If ever you're not sure whether to reach out to someone in time of grief or not, let me assure you that a call, a note, a donation is a gift more valuable than words can express. Yes, a little more so in this time of isolation, but always a gift of love and caring. I have not the words to tell you how meaningful every one was. So now 5.5 months have passed since Linda's death. The calls, the notes, the donations have slowed to a virtual halt. And it's time for Yizkor. A time to gather together, to share not just my grief, but each other's grief. Except once again, we're not together. Of course, I'm grateful for the technology that makes it possible for us to experience this service online, but we're not together. We are robbed of being together in what should be a sacred community gathering. Let me share a memory with you about Yizkor. As a child, Yizkor was a mystery. I distinctly remember sitting with my dad all day in shul on Yom Kippur. But when Yizkor time came, I and all my friends were ushered out of the sanctuary. It was as though something inappropriate for children to witness was happening. What on earth could be happening that children were dismissed from participating in? I had visions of people weeping and wailing and throwing themselves on the floor in paroxysms of grief. Not until I was a student rabbi in Bloomington, Illinois at the age of 25 did I attend my first Yizkor service, the one, by the way, that I had to plan and conduct. I remember reading the service in advance to plan it. I thought to myself, what were my parents and their friends protecting us from? Yizkor certainly isn't anything like what I had imagined. Instead, it is a time, a beautiful time, to reminisce, to reflect, to remember. It is a bittersweet time, touched by the sadness we feel at the loss of our loved ones, but at the same time warmed by the beautiful memories that are so much a part of us. And so once again this year, as in 2000, I'm experiencing Yizkor with the fresh wound of the death of a loved one. I can still feel Linda's presence every day. Every time I pull out the hand vacuum to sweep up the crumbs I've dropped on the floor, I can hear her laughing. Now you know what it's like to have to clean up the mess off the floor that you made. Whenever I make dinner and have to look up a recipe for how to cook something as simple as a piece of chicken or fish, I can see her effortlessly throw together a fabulous meal. I turn over in bed and sometimes expect to see her sleeping next to me. She used to make honey cakes for Rosh Hashanah and distribute them to a few friends. So I, who never baked in my life, found the recipe and made some as a way of keeping her present during my Rosh Hashanah. And the meal that I made for Rosh Hashanah lunch was the same one that she served every year. And of course, every dish, every utensil I use, every sheet on the bed I sleep on, every towel on the rack that I dry myself with, all were chosen by her. She is ever present and as loved today as when she was alive. And if my experience with my parents, now gone 20 years, is any indication, that will still be true 20 years from now. But today, at this moment, standing here in this pulpit in our beloved sanctuary, I am struck by that surreal feeling once again, as at Linda's funeral, of you, my community of love and support, not being present with me, and of my not being with the others of you whose families' names will be read. I don't just want to say Kaddish. I want to say Kaddish with you, to hear your voice joined to mine in shared grief and remembrance. And again, I know I speak not just for myself, but all who will stand for the first time to say Kaddish for a loved one who died this year, a parent who shaped your life, a sibling who molded your childhood, a spouse who was your bashert, your chosen one, your child who was your reach into the future, your friend with whom you shared your everyday challenges and successes. And for those of you who have not lost someone this year, but are here to remember and feel the love of family and friends who died in years past, you too, I'm sure, miss being together with us, your community. It is a surreal Yizkor for us all. To hopefully help soften that feeling, when Rabbi Hayon reads the names for Kaddish at the end of the service, as he does every year, you will see on your screen not only the names of those being remembered, you will also see the names of the congregation members who will be saying Kaddish for them. Our hope is that seeing the names of the living members before you will help give you a sense of community, a sense of sharing, and that it will somehow lessen that surreal feeling of being apart. Maybe we can be socially distant, but spiritually close, and know that others are thinking of us as we recite Kaddish. To all who are participating in this service, whose loved ones died in the years past, I do hope that all of your memories are sweet and sustaining. To those who, like me, are mourning a loved one who died recently, I pray this service will help move us forward on our journey of mourning. And like all of you, I pray that soon we will be able to gather together to resume the powerful experience of being together in sacred community. May God bless us all with a sweet, healthy new year filled with blessings, and may our memories help sustain us into the new year. And to this we do all say, Amen.